When composers write for traditional instruments, they usually mark the score for performers to indicate loudness, phrasing, and so forth. These directions must be interpreted by performers as they play. The electronic medium has fused the roles of composer and performer. In creating an electronic work, the composer is both composing and performing the work as he records it on tape. He is making decisions about loudness, tempo, phrasing, and other variables usually left, to some extent, to the performer. Some compositions make use of both electronic sounds and live performance. Mario Davidovsky has written a series of 6 works called Synchronisms. You heard his synchronism number 1 for flute and electronic sounds at the beginning of this session. Mario, would you tell us a little about synchronism number 1?
The electronic sounds for synchronisms were prepared in the tape studio. When the piece is performed, a flutist plays along with the tape. This is the opening of the score of synchronisms number 1. The flute part is completely written out in traditional notation on the lower staff. The top 2 staffs refer to the tape sounds and provide cues to guide the flutist and the person operating the tape recorder. The directions start and stop show when to start and stop the tape in relation to the flute part. Starting and stopping the tape during the performance make it easier for the flutist to remain in synchronization with the tape. The flute tempo can be somewhat flexible in solo parts, but when the tape starts, the flutist must coordinate his part exactly with the tape sounds. It would be almost impossible to show the tape sounds in traditional musical notation, but in places where it is possible, I have done so. Here, as the flutist plays the note B, the tape starts, and the first tape sound is also a B. This is followed by a graceful figure in the electronic sounds similar to a flute sound. Let's listen to the piece up to that point.
Mario, why did you decide to write a piece for flute and electronic sounds?
I think the choice of a flute for the first piece was suggested to me because the facility that I would have to integrate into a coherent musical language the flute sound with electronic sound, because of the great agility of the flute practically on all its range, the great control on its dynamics, and also because a flute gave me access to certain very specific types of attacks that would facilitate the blending with electronic sounds. Listen to another excerpt from Synchronisms number 1. As you listen, notice the different kinds of interactions between the flute and electronic sounds. Sometimes they blend together, and at other points there is a clear separation between the two.
Composing in the tape studio is laborious and difficult. Every sound in a composition must be generated and modified separately, and then combined with other sounds by mixing and by splicing tape. The electronic music synthesizer was developed to overcome these practical disadvantages and to give the composer more immediate and complete control over the sounds. The first synthesizer was built by RCA in 1955, and a few years later they built a much larger one, the Mark II, which we're looking at here. It's the only one of its kind in the world. The synthesizer is made up of several panels of equipment. There are oscillators, filters, white noise generators, mixers, and in short, all of the equipment we found in the tape studio. But this equipment has been organized around central control panels that enable the composer to program all of the elements of the sounds automatically. When I want to write a piece for synthesizer, I may not write out the music in traditional notation at all, but I must give directions to the synthesizer indicating the exact frequencies, amplitudes, envelopes, and other qualities of the sounds that I want to hear. To convey this information to the synthesizer, I punch holes on these paper rolls. The pattern of holes are like coded messages. They cause the synthesizer to produce a series of electrical voltages, which are eventually converted into sound. By operating these switches, I can try out various sounds in a piece before I actually punch the paper roll. I test with the switches until I get the sounds I originally planned. Then I specify the sounds by punching the paper roll. Finally, I turn on a motor which automatically drives the paper roll through the synthesizer at any speed I choose, and at the same time the piece is recorded on magnetic tape. The speed of the paper roll determines how fast the synthesizer will play the piece. If I decide I would like to change the tempo, it is an easy matter to change the speed of the motor. Recently, a great number of smaller electronic music synthesizers have been developed, such as the Moog, the ARC, and the Buchla. All of these synthesizers are really tape studios in compact form. They offer the composer certain devices for generating and controlling sounds automatically, but these controls are not as complete and accurate as those found on the RCA synthesizer, and the composer must often splice sounds together to complete a composition, just as he does in the tape studio. During the past 12 years, I've realized a number of my compositions on the RCA synthesizer. One of these is Vision and Prayer, a setting of the poem of the same title by Dylan Thomas. It is written for soprano and synthesized sounds. Thomas's poem has a rather unusual structure. It consists of 12 shaped stanzas. The first 6 look like this one. The first line is 1 syllable long. Each successive line becomes longer by 1 syllable until a maximum length of 9 syllables is reached. The pattern is then reversed for the last half of the stanza. In the second half of the poem, each stanza begins with a line 9 syllables long, decreasing to a center line of 1 syllable and then returning to 9 syllables. The form of the poem played a large part in determining the form of the musical setting. Each stanza is set separately, and the lines of each stanza are set off from each other in the music. Listen to the first stanza, in which the soprano speaks her part. Unlike Davidovsky's synchronism, in which the textures of flute and electronic sounds blend together, Vision and Prayer gives prominence to the performer, and the effect is that of a soprano solo largely accompanied by electronic sounds. Another important element in synchronism is the relationship of the timbres of the flute and electronic sounds. In Vision and Prayer, I was concerned less with timbre in itself than with the rhythmic accuracy which the electronic medium makes possible. In some parts of Vision and Prayer, the tempo of the electronic sounds is faster than any performer could play. Of course, it's possible for the synthesizer to produce very accurate pitches and very complicated rhythms at any tempo. A good illustration of this is the setting of stanza 10. Vision and Prayer is in the tradition of musical settings of poems by composers throughout the ages. It attempts, through music, to add another dimension to the imagery and sound structure of the poem. Composers of electronic music are concerned with the same questions of expressiveness and structure that musicians have always been interested in. Now we have found new ways of dealing with these questions in the electronic medium. Both the tape studio and the synthesizer give the composer the advantage of working directly with the sounds he is using in a composition. The disadvantage of the tape studio and synthesizer is the tremendous amount of specialized equipment necessary to produce all of the different musical elements which composers require. Enter the computer. The computer does not have oscillators, white noise generators, filters, or any of the audio electronic equipment we found in the tape studio and synthesizer. The computer itself does not produce any sound. Instead, it calculates a great many numbers which represent the exact values of the electrical voltages needed to produce the sounds. Let me show how the computer does this. Suppose I want to hear a sine wave with a particular frequency and amplitude. I can calculate a series of points which accurately define the shape of the sine wave. To perform such calculations for every sound in a composition would be so time-consuming as to be practically impossible for a human being. The computer can perform these operations extremely rapidly and extremely accurately. The composer specifies the frequency, amplitude, duration, and other properties of the sounds by key-punching computer cards. From this information, the computer is able to calculate amplitudes at a great many points along the waveform. This digital tape produced by the computer contains in coded form the numbers which represent these amplitudes. This little machine, called a data translator, receives the numbers from the digital tape and changes them to electrical impulses equal to the amplitudes of the waveforms. In the final step, these impulses are transferred to ordinary magnetic recording tape. In working with the computer, the composer is not in direct contact with the sounds he is creating. He can't hear how his piece sounds until he plays the tape. However, should he wish to make any changes after hearing the piece, he can do so by repunching the necessary computer cards. Quartets and Pairs, a piece for computer by James Randall, shows how the composer can use the computer to produce different timbres and complex and precise rhythmic effects. There are 4 distinct kinds of sounds in quartets and pairs. One is similar in sound to a plucked string. Another is like that of a clarinet. The third kind of sound consists of sine tones in a relatively low range. And finally, there are sine tones in a predominantly high range. The effect of all this is similar to 4 different instruments playing together. Listen to a short excerpt from Quartets and Pairs and try to hear the 4 parts. The 4 parts are similar to instrumental parts, but there are differences. The range of each part is much wider than that of any conventional instrument. It may move quickly from a very high note to a very low note. The timbre of each part is distinctive, especially in the use of vibrato, the slight fluctuation in pitch on certain notes. The rhythmic relationships among the parts are so complex that the piece would be very difficult for performers to play. As the composer works with the computer, or in fact with any electronic medium, he necessarily learns more about how we, as human beings, hear music. We have found that it is very difficult to predict how a particular waveform will actually sound. Long experience with traditional musical instruments has given us a great deal of information about how to write for them, but we are now dealing with new sounds for which little information exists. Much experimentation will be necessary to learn exactly what we can hear and how we hear it. Musicians are becoming interested in problems of perception posed in a unique way by our work in electronic music. And the wide range of expressiveness afforded by the electronic medium offers composers more varied musical choices and is influencing all kinds of music. New problems and new solutions are emerging as we continue to compose and listen to electronic music.